The Further Education of OverSoul 7 by Jane Roberts, read by Martin John. Chapter 17, Ram the God-ologist, and Case History 9871, J. Christ. The god-ologists were tucked away in a small corner of the universe, though once their domain had been extensive. Godology, it seemed, was a dying art, Seven thought. Not really, of course, since no arts die. But in the context of the times he was dealing with, godology wasn't the exciting pursuit it used to be. Seven shook his head with some dismay. The lawns and shrubs were in need of trimming. Dust settled over the once ivied towers, and the buildings themselves had shrunken. Once they'd been so large that it took centuries to get from one complex to another, and now the same buildings could be seen in the twinkling of an eye. The godologists were a particular breed anyhow, for their profession demanded that they mix godly and human characteristics, an uneasy blend, a trans-species really, that made them, well, a trifle eccentric. Had to have some psychological profiles on the gods for Lydia's benefit, though, so Seven resolutely hurried on. The particular godologist Seven wanted to see was the one he affectionately called Ram, because the godologist always seemed to be butting his head up against divinities that he couldn't understand. Names don't mean much to souls, so it was only when Seven actually entered the godologist's domain that it occurred to him that his godologist and Jeffrey Boy's psychologist friend had the same name. Some godologists had physical lives going on, and some didn't. Since Seven didn't know Ram's status in that regard, he forgot the entire matter in the press of more serious issues. He promised Lydia that he'd discover what he could about the gods as they existed in terms of the world she was used to. So Seven sent out mental feelers for Ram as soon as he approached the nearly deserted grounds. From somewhere inside, Ram flashed his mental welcome. My, yes. What have we here? Seven! Delighted. And he sent Seven directions. Briskly, now Seven went past empty consolation rooms to find Ram's small cubicle. How long has it been? Ram asked at once. How time flies. In any case, we'd made some changes since I saw you last. Not all for the best, of course, but at least I'm on to something vital. Because Seven was of OverSoul stock, Ram took human form, appearing as a sly old godologist, white kinky hair getting caught in the silver halo that was the sign of his station. He had a pink, flawless complexion that was far too youthful for the rest of his image, Seven saw, wondering indeed if the godologist was getting out of touch with his earthly connections. No real human would take Ram as just another wise old man. And of course the halo was a dead giveaway too. Seven just grinned, though, and said nothing. He didn't want to hurt Ramram's feelings for the one thing, and for another, he knew that the god-ologists, being academics, were very jealous of their rank, and the halo marked Ramram as having 10 doctorates of divinity. They have cut down on your space a bit, Seven said. He wasn't quite sure how to relate to Ramram after all this time, so Seven kept changing shapes until, watching him, Ramram smiled brilliantly and said, "Yes, yes, that one is fine." Seven stabilized. He had his 14-year-old image on, and it wore a humble brown woolen robe, as befitted a seeker after truth. Seven grinned, and Ramram said, "I haven't had a real student in ages, so I hope you don't mind looking like one for a while. It's such a joy just to imagine that god-ologists have apprentices again." "I'll look even younger if you want," Seven offered. Then, to make Ramram feel better, Seven went on, "I am a student, though, and am on a pilgrimage to find the gods on behalf of my human personalities. I don't pretend to know why this is all so important to them, to one of them, anyhow, Lydia. I'm under the impression that human concepts of divinity are so limited that—" Exactly, Ramram cried excitedly. "Look, I've something very important to show you that proves that very point." Ramram rambled through his massive file cabinet as he talked. "I've done some excellent new studies," he said, "but one in particular should be of special interest to you, since so many of your personalities are involved with Christendom. Look at this. Christ's Case History. I prepared it myself." Ramram's enthusiasm was infectious, but Seven shook his head. "I'm not interested in case histories, but in living divine personalities," he said. "But here you have it all," Ramram exclaimed. "It's a thorough investigation. Here you find divine motivation individually and specifically apparent. Here you see the birth of a god, here the first primal scream as godhood tears itself from non-existence into divine reality, ripped from the womb of eternity. I never heard such nonsense in any of my lives, or before or after," Seven said, scandalized. "Gods come into being because they want to." Yes, Ramram said impatiently. "That doesn't mean birth is easy. Any birth is hard, and a god's birth is, well, spectacular and harder than most. The files show this to be true. The statistics make it clear. Interviews with divine personages confirm the facts." "Haven't you ever examined your own existence?" Seven asked. I understand that all god-ologists were part divine, albeit minor god connections. But still, what about your own birth, or births?" "Examining my own existence wouldn't be scientific," Ramram said severely. "I do have a counterpart on Earth, a psychologist who's examining existence from a human standpoint. Granted, I don't give him a lot of attention, and I'm not even sure if he acknowledges the existence of the soul, but—" Seven bristled despite himself, but he said politely, "If you'll excuse me, dividing yourself in half in order to study the whole seems silly to me. I hope I'm not hurting your feelings, but what happened to the art of godology. Now it is a science? It always was. Art is to neither here nor there. You want to be more specific, and a scientist's feelings can't be hurt, because he's too objective to have feelings to be hurt, Ram said rather proudly. Now, do you want to see this case history, or don't you? It's Jesus of Nazareth, case history 9871. Okay, that would be fine, Seven said, using his snappiest Earth vernacular because he saw that, scientist or no, Ram's feelings were hurt. I would really appreciate it, Seven said heartily. Ram's face brightened, but he coughed, cleared his throat, and began to speak in his professional style. The birth data are all here, he said. Christ was carried in the womb of time, and he had to fight his way through centuries, misplacing stars, galaxies, even warping the universe, falling through black holes, tumbling from one to the other, seeking that one time and space, that one earthly womb, that one microscopic slit in the soil of time. Seven tried not to yawn. He was thinking that overall he liked Jeffrey Boy's Ram better. At least he had a sense of humor. But the god-ologist went on, quite carried away by his own presentation. He kept interrupting himself, saying, yes, or indeed, that's the way it was, then continuing, growing more excited until Seven became quite alarmed. Again, privately, he wondered if Ram was really mad. More, Seven couldn't get a word in edgewise. And right then and there he resolved never again to lecture at will in his dream classes. Not that he ever really did, of course, but Ram finally stopped to clear his throat, and Seven said, "Where did you get all that, information?" "From Christ himself," Ram said. "Under hypnosis. It all came out." He rubbed his hands together triumphantly. "I have it all in the case history." And Seven said, "Well, would you mind showing me the case history itself? Then you won't have to go to all the bother of describing it." Ram turned on the eternal recording machine, saying, "All these images came directly from Christ's mind. But first, here's an exterior shot of the experiment conditions. Look." He aimed the machine at the eastern wall of the god-ologist building, and the wall disappeared for all practical purposes. Instead, the projections from the machine flashed out against the sky, somewhat like a drive-in theater, Seven thought, except that the whole sky was a screen. He wondered how many others were watching. Christ lay on a golden couch, spread with royal velvet robes, his eyes closed, his long brown-gray ringlets in disarray about his face, his hands folded upon his chest, and a coverlet pulled up where his Johnny robe left off. He seemed to be asleep or dreaming. Occasionally, one divine toe twitched beneath the coverlet. Beside him sat Ram, in his professional capacity. "Now count backwards slowly," he was saying, "from 1,000,000 back to 0. "That must have taken forever," Seven whispered. Ram, rather annoyed, said, "Never mind. will dispense with the hypnotic induction and count. He touched the lever. I'll skip ahead a bit. Here we are. Parental memories. 7 leapt back as a gigantic Lucifer appeared in the sky projection. His form took 1,000 images at once, while, overall, one huge leering visage remained. The original boogeyman, Ram said, with great satisfaction. Quite effective, don't you think? You might say that Lucifer was Christ's shadow and represented all the portions of his personality that he had to deny. The love of power, lust for knowledge, and the sheer automatic vitality, or the masculine aspects in earthly terminology. Christ's gentleness, understanding, and so forth stressed the feminine. The meek shall inherit the earth and all of that. Well, Lucifer, in a way, is the exaggerated other side of that image, the uninhibited. Couldn't you just be quiet for a minute? 7 interrupted uneasily. He stared at the Lucifer image and cautiously dematerialized at the same time. He'd never seen such a terrifying figure. Though it didn't speak, it raged. The mouth moved insinuatingly, as if it were calling out for blood and vengeance in 1,000 unspoken languages. Ram said proudly, "That image was projected directly from Christ's mind. In a way, it was born with him." 7 stepped back even further as the giant-sized Lucifer changed into a shouting Jehovah, threatening the Israelites and demanding sacrifices. A mountain appeared, and out of a dreadful yet splendid cloud glimmered God the Father's hands, perfect yet somehow frightening, delivering the tablets with the 10 Commandments to Moses. But even Moses looked insane, 7 thought unhappily, ecstatic, alive to a frenzy. "That's parental memory also," Ram said. "Finally, of course, Lucifer and God the Father behave in rather similar ways for all intents and purposes, so that afterwards the case history gets more complicated." "It's complicated enough for me right now," 7 exclaimed, "and scary. Doesn't any of this bother you at all?" "You forget I've seen it all before," Ram said, just a trifle smugly. "But watch now." 7 really wanted to leave. He remembered how Lydia felt once as a child during a frightening movie. She was afraid to move for fear that if she turned her back on the screen, the feared images would chase her down the aisle. He really wasn't that worried, he told himself. And besides, he didn't want Ram to think he was a coward. So he stayed. Now the sky screen showed a thriving city. Donkeys, horses, and people filled the streets. Vendors and stalls surrounded palaces and temples. The tumult was tremendous. As Ram took a close-up so that 7 could hear the individual voices, when in the next moment the entire city was destroyed. 7 couldn't tell what had happened. There was fire, brimstone, smoke. There were buildings toppling, stalls squashed, horses and people making agonizing sounds, a donkey with its head cut off by flying debris. Seven stared. The donkey was still braying, or so it seemed. Then the sound was cut off as quickly as the head had been. "You'd think Lucifer did all that," Ram said. "But it was Jehovah, you see? With parental memories like that, and a father who wiped out whole populations if they angered him, well, even a divine son would be bound to have problems. To that, add the fact that Christ had a human, not a divine, mother. Jehovah didn't have a divine mate. He was too ill-tempered. No goddess would put up with him. So in a way, Christ was a half-orphan, divinely speaking. He was the son of a father who was basically impotent. Hence, the angel appeared to Mary, a father who took his frustrations out on earth and, Ram added triumphantly, on his son. Why else did he send Christ to be crucified? And no matter how he pretended, Christ knew that his father hated him. Couldn't face the truth, though, so he projected his father's hateful qualities onto Lucifer. "I wish you wouldn't interpret the pictures for me," Seven cried, exasperated, because now the 12 disciples appeared with John closest to Christ, his head bowed near Christ's chest, and Ram said, "The relationship between the 12 men was interesting also, especially Christ's with John, the tenderness that should have gone to women." Ram lifted his shaggy white brows significantly. His halo wobbled slightly. He straightened it impatiently and started to continue. "How many others are viewing these slides?" Seven asked, before Ram could get going again. "All those images are just splashed out against the sky for anyone to see. I should think Christ could get you for invasion of divine privacy, and I wouldn't want to get Jehovah or Lucifer mad either. Lucifer at least has a sense of humor, but I'm sure Jehovah wouldn't understand at all." But basically, Jehovah and Lucifer are both projections of Christ's mind, Ram said. "Then how come the sky is getting so dark?" Seven whispered. "Ah, that must be Christ's anxieties emerging and taking form," Ram said appreciatively. "But don't you feel even a trifle uneasy?" Seven asked. "The sky is getting darker by the moment." "No. Like true scientists, we god-ologists turn our feelings off in order to do our work. We can't afford to become involved in subjectivity." Ram spoke very kindly, but rather condescendingly. "Well, you'd better turn your feelings back on if you can," Seven said, "because mine tell me that we're in for some trouble." The sky had darkened to such a degree that Seven found it almost impossible to remember what daylight looked like. All of the projections disappeared, yet in a strange way they remained imprinted in the darkness itself. Spooky giant-sized negatives made a layered dark on dark, and in the center of all this, Seven sensed a motion he didn't like at all. magnificent depths of psychological activity, Ram breathed. Christ's mind is now reacting to the projections set up by itself and... Will you be quiet? Seven glared at the god-ologist, who shrugged and continued his musings, only silently. But Seven was fully and genuinely frightened by now. Who knew what divine psychological mechanisms they were tampering with? And once set into motion, who but a god could stop them? And Seven felt that they were tampering. Let Christ's mind keep its secrets. Let the gods save their divine privacy. Let... Seven broke off his thoughts. The darkness was now swooping into itself at an incredible rate, and in the heart of the activity, a small microscopic image was forming. It was tinier than Seven thought anything could be and still be visible, an image of such intensity that its vitality completely individualized its size, so that now Seven wondered how he'd ever thought that importance and size were connected in any way at all. He stared at the image because there seemed to be nothing else he could do, and discovered that it was actually composed of glittering lights that somehow existed on the other side of darkness. I'll teach them something about hypnosis, Christ chuckled. Zeus said uneasily, I still think you're going too far. Nonsense, Christ said. He and Zeus were whiling away the afternoon. They watched Ram's projections, which had appeared outside of the rest home's huge windows, flickering in dimensions too vast for mortal eyes to follow. Still, it was a damn good show, Zeus thundered. I give that idiot god-ologist just what he wanted, Christ said. Verily, I told him just what he wanted to hear. It's not my fault if he had to deal with the consequences. The tiny image that Ram and Seven were staring at now made up the entire contents of the universe as far as they were concerned, and each of them interpreted it in his own frightening way. Every one of the separate glowing details he saw made sense to Seven. For example, yet none of the details taken together formed anything at all, while in each eternal moment they seemed just about to, and the suspense was almost unbearable. What about OverSoul 6? Zeus asked. 7. It's OverSoul 7, though if he doesn't watch it, he'll be OverSoul 5, Christ muttered. Verily, he's been asking for this. It'll do him good, and it will teach him not to go to the god-ologist expecting to learn anything of merit. It'll certainly give him a better perspective. Ram was seeing himself in a million different pieces, scattered, throbbing, changing relationships. His memories kept getting organized in different ways, like jigsaw images constantly changing shape and forming new pictures. The dark yet bright images held his attention so that it seemed nothing else had ever existed or ever would. Now, That's hypnosis, Christ chuckled again. Still, that part about Jehovah was good, Zeus said, drinking his wine, at the same time wondering if it were nearly time for supper. He eyed Christ slyly, rubbing his black beard, trembling with a laughter that sent the royal floorboards quaking. I didn't know you hated your father all that much. It's no joke, Christ said irritably. Mythology is full of such nonsense, and overloaded with divine murders. Humans always want the gods to handle their problems for them and commit their murders for them as well. He broke off, musing. That's why Allah did so nicely. He didn't hide the facts. Well, never mind, Zeus chided. Hadn't you better snap those two out of it, whatever spell you've thrown them into? They're really likely to get lost, you know. Besides, it's time for dinner. I should make that god-ologist count from 1,000,000 backwards, 1,000,000 times. Did you ever hear of such idiocy? Christ tried to sound humorous, but he was upset. Invasion of divine privacy was involved. OverSoul 7 was right. Bring them back in, Zeus said soothingly. They expect me to retaliate, Christ said stubbornly. I'm only acting out my role. Give them a break anyway, Zeus said. You're supposed to be merciful too. At least take pity on me. We'll never eat at this rate. I knew you just wanted your dinner, Christ said, laughing because Zeus' good humor was godly in its proportions. Of course, his eerie at times could be equally impressive. But Zeus didn't brood as he did, Christ thought. So he said, Verily. Ram and Seven's consciousness were more or less captured by the multidimensional images that glittered in the doubled-in upon itself darkness of the sky. Christ called out good-naturedly, There they are, reached out a royal hand that magically extended out through galaxies and brought Seven and Ram back in. Like two poor fish, Zeus said. This time Christ smiled unindulgently. With one stare of his mind, he destroyed Ram's case history 9871. With another, he deposited Ram on the floor of the god-ologist's main building. And with another, he brought a bewildered OverSoul 7 directly to his golden couch. In Chapter 17, Peace, Light, and Love. Aloha.